But it has something to do with things that I do. I took a children's literature class with a professor named Mrs. Campos. This was over 40 years ago, so I have no idea where Mrs. Campos is or whether Mrs. Campos is still living or not. These drawings are drawings that were done by Mrs. Campos' father, who had a syndicated comic strip that ran in a newspaper. And at the end of a semester of class I had with her, she asked me to come to her office and visit with her because she had something she wanted to give me. And these were the things she wanted to give me. Original drawings for the comic strips that her father had made. And so it says something about the kind of investment that people who were teaching here at LACC would have in students who were part of their classes. That when they understood that they had an interest in something that was really worthwhile, and if they had anything to offer that was of any value and that could help, then they were more than willing and happy to give it. And that was the thing I think I learned about being in LACC that subsequently, seemed to be different in other places. The people here, they seem to care. People who are really good in the arts, whether it's being a good singer, a good dancer, a good draftsman, a good painter, that all those things depended on talent. And that there were some people who were born with the talent, and then that there were other people who were not. And for the people who were not, there was nothing you could do for them. There was no way they could get in and participate in the game at the highest level. Well, I was fortunate enough never to believe that. Because what I came to believe was that knowledge was better than talent. That the more you knew, the more you were able to do. And that the more you knew, the more you were able to then decide where you wanted to fit in and how you wanted to fit in. So you become the arbiter of how you participate, rather than waiting on the sideline for somebody to recognize something of value they think they see in you, and then give you a chance by trying to promote it. Because I'm all about self-determination. You have to know what you want, and then you have to develop a strategy for how to get it. And the fact that you make a decision about one thing at a given time has no bearing on whether or not you can change your mind later on. But it's important at some point to name the thing that you want, to set it down on paper, to see what it looks like as an object, and then to look at it from a lot of different sides, and then decide how you want to handle it. Clarity is more important than anything else. There's nothing worse than being really vague about what you're trying to get at. So in my work, you'll see that there's a certain kind of clarity at work in everything that I do, but there's a lot of variety in the things that I do as well. I'm going backwards in time, in a way. Although this is not the last painting I did. This is a fairly recent painting. So what's important about this painting for me, not in its singularity per se, but this painting is now at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, so in the collection there. And so since one of my early ambitions from that first field trip we took to the LA County Art Museum from 49th Street School, one of my ambitions was to be in that museum, to have a work in there that would sit alongside all the other work that was in that museum. That was my goal. And I had to figure out what was it going to take for me in order for me to be able to achieve that. And so my approach to what I do has everything to do with that as an objective, in the same sense that if you look at the pantheon of museums around the world, at the top of the list are going to be museums like the Museum of Modern Art, like the Metropolitan Museum, like the Whitney Museum, like the Louvre. There are all of these museums around the world that, on some level, help define all of our ideas, our notions, and our expectations of what good things in artwork or important things in artwork are. So this is where people go to find out. But I'm going to go through a couple of things. So this is a painting. That's a bad slide, but it's an early collage. This is a collage from around that period when I was in 1978, 1979, 1980, when I was starting the show at Copland. And this is fairly recent, 2 or 3 years old. Now, I have an interesting story about this picture. So at my studio in Chicago, so I have my yard man, Mr. Barnes, who cut my grass. He, with his team, people who cut my grass. And Mr. Barnes from Mississippi. So he retired last year, so now I don't have anybody to cut my grass except somebody who kind of comes by randomly. But Mr. Barnes I can count on. But Mr. Barnes was 70 years old at 71 years old. He had been cutting the grass for our house and for my studio for about 6-7 years. And then his wife had a stroke, and then he wanted to move back down to Georgia to be nearer to his family. And so I was having a show at David's Werner Gallery in London. And so before the work went out of the studio, Mr. Barnes and the crew wanted to come in and see everything before it left. So I had him come in, and they looked around at all the work, and Mr. Barnes looked at that painting. He says, "She's so cute." She talking to me. And so that's the way Mr. Barnes responded to the work. And that was perfect. Was perfect. Now that was at the show in London I had at David's Werner Gallery. Jay-Z and Beyonce wanted to come by, so we were actually leaving for the airport. So that show I did at David's Werner Gallery had a title, a theme at it, because it LACC. And it said something about if a part of my mission was to establish a presence for a black figure and the idea of blackness within the kind of museum world and within the art historical canon, this is how I sort of structure the way I approach the work that I do. I mean, if I don't always have a theme, but often I have a theme, and there are often ideas I want to project. And when I'm trying to project an idea like that, I'm looking at all of the different ways in which that idea might be represented, might be configured. And so, and since in art, the idea of aesthetics have always been connected with notions of beauty. This is one of the functions that art performs, is to help establish some paradigm so what we understand to be the beautiful as an idea. And so I do that with the work that I do as well. And people were always wondering what the crown on the head of this figure, what that represents. And I was telling them, well, you know, that crown is actually, was modeled after the crown. This is Gloria Smith, who was the second Miss Black America in 1968. And we know there was only a Miss Black America pageant because they wouldn't let black women participate in the Miss America pageant. And the idea of the Miss Black America pageant at the time was that it was supposed to happen the day after the Miss America pageant took place on the same stage in the same venue. And part of that was to make the point about the way in which black women were excluded from notions of beauty and the participation in a pageant that would simply codify what the beautiful was. Now, this is that painting. Portrait of the artist as a shadow of his former self. And so the function of this painting, there's some things that are going to come up after this that are key to the reason why this painting sort of exists, and how this painting sort of launched me into the way of thinking and the period in which all of those black figures that you saw earlier developed. They all come from this. They all come from this painting. And this painting comes in part from a way in which the idea, in which this notion of dealing with issues of visibility and invisibility had been structured within American culture. And in part was influenced by a reading of Ralph Ellison's book, Invisible Man, in which he outlines how the condition of invisibility has nothing to do with the kind of retinal capacity of people to see or not to see you, but it had to do a lot with the psychological ways in which black people were never desired to be seen. I started making these paintings based on this one with a black figure that was against the black background, where you could alternately see and then not see the figure. But in these cases, the one thing that was always going to be present was the white teeth and the white of the eye. And those things have to do with folklore and with jokes. You know, my wife had an experience that sort of really made that vivid, because she's an actor. And a director of a play that she was working on one said to her, "Cheryl, would you smile so we can figure out where you are when the lights were out, so we can see where you are?" Because that's a trope or a figure of the black person that's so black that you can't see them in the dark unless they're smiling or they're wearing a white shirt. So all of that stuff starts to find its way into the way the work starts to emerge. But the other thing that was important about this work was that it was a way for me to reset my priorities. It's a linguist and post-structuralist theorist named Roland Barthes. A collection of essays he did, a book called Writing Degree Zero. In order to reset your priorities sometimes, you have to go back to a 0 degree. And a 0 degree is a kind of an originating point from which you can then start again, but starting again with a different kind of comprehension of what it is you're trying to do, with more insight, with more sophistication, all of those things. And so there are moments in which you have to do this sort of reset of all your priorities. And this was my moment to reset my priorities. And what I was resetting my priorities from were collages and things like this. These small mixed media collages, paint and paper, found material, and stuff like that. This is what I was resetting my priorities from. Because I had come to the conclusion while I was doing this kind of work that there was only so much value I was going to be able to get from this kind of an approach, from these kinds of images, from abstraction per se. And that the maximum that I was going to be able to get was going to be insufficient for what I thought my objectives needed to be. And to do the kind of work that I thought the images that I wanted to produce would have to do. And which is that work of sort of entering into the museum and changing people's expectations of what they're likely to see in the museum when they go there. And so that painting was my degree 0, because these were the works that I was doing before, literally right up until the moment when I did that painting. And then after that painting, everything changed. But in the course of your development as an artist, you do a lot of things. I mean, there are a couple of things that you find it necessary to be focused on. So there's, at one moment in your life, you're focused on the creation or the generation of meaning. And then there are other times in your development where you're only interested in the development of forms. And so this conflict between meanings and form is the kind of give and take, the back and forth that sort of happens in the art world. So all, periodically, one approach being in ascendancy and another being sort of in decline. I mean, this is the tug of war that goes on. Meaning and meaninglessness. And so I was doing a lot of stuff like this early on, trying to find, after that, the black figure, trying to find the perfect calibration of that figure and the blackness and the image and things like that to get to the things that I wanted to get to. There is an idea that found a kind of new cycle of energy in the late 60s during a period called the Black Arts Movement, which was a kind of black cultural nationalism that tried to find a way to inscribe these kinds of politics and culture in artworks that people were making. But this is not far from where I live. And my studio is actually not far from here either. This is a picture in Chicago. So those train tracks there, the elevated train, that's the green line that goes down south side to 63rd. And it goes 63rd Ashland on the one side, and then it goes to 63rd and Cottage Grove on the other end. But those pylons, that red, black, and the green, which we know is the colors of the black nationalist flag, or the flag that Marcus Garvey invented at UNIA. But there's a house right next to this vacant lot that's owned by an organization called the Black Moorish Divine. And so of course, when the city put those pylons up, because those lots are all owned by the city. Where houses are torn down and people don't claim the property, the city eventually takes the property over and it sort of stays as vacant lots. But in order to keep people from dumping trash and stuff on it, they put these pylons up. But of course, they painted them with the red, black, and green, painted the garbage can with the red, black, and green. There's a rock over there that's painted red, black, and green. But I started doing I drive around the city all the time, and I'm always looking for places in which the idea of this sort of black cultural identity, black nationalist, cultural nationalist identity sort of pops up. And so this is the garage door. This is down at 70th and Ashland. So I go all over the city, you'll see evidence of people who are sort of invested in, what the emblem of this kind of self-determination means, what it means to be a nation within a nation. You see people carrying the flag a lot at Black Lives Matter events and marches. But I did an exhibition that sort of explored this idea of a black aesthetic with a show I did in Chicago called One True Thing, Meditations on Black Aesthetics. And it was literally an attempt at looking at every dimension of what that could mean and what the implications of it can be and whether or not those things could be used to do a variety of different kinds of work.